SOT West, Burrow Team. Coming at you from NTC, Off the Radar.
This is Off the Radar. I'm Captain Weston Rich, an observer coach trainer for the Green Berets at the National Training Center.
Welcome to part 2 of our conversation with Captain Eric Plummer. If you haven't heard the first part of this conversation, please go back and give that a listen now. During this second section, we will discuss the value proposition for psychological operations training at the National Training Center. Definitely good advice. So obviously, like Eric said, reach out and understand who you're falling under while you're here and make those coordinations preferably in person so they know your face, and then you can give that pitch about what you do prior to even being on ground. Mm-hmm. And then while you're here, just run through a quick, without giving away the answers.
Yeah.
They show up. Obviously, we're drawing miles gear and other things to do the exercise, but the PSYOPers are tied into the AOB staff typically.
Yep.
We've seen, or we've talked about, hopefully them going out with detachments, but haven't seen that yet.
Yeah, and I think when they first show up, everybody shows up, and they we put the folks in the soft ruba, which is kind of like their staging area. So there they'll draw equipment like miles gear, whatever it is for their vehicles, and for their personal miles. And then typically that's when we'll do extra brief, like, hey, here's the rules of engagement while you're out here, safety brief, whatever.
Yeah.
And then I'll typically right after that is when I issue them their equipment to be able to access, the synthetic internet, box phones, things like that.
And right when they get that stuff, is there things populated for them to go sift through and actually provide
so at that
value
point,
to the commander?
Not immediately, because
because
that's typically that stuff starts populating probably closer to when the exercise starts.
Mm-hmm.
But it is they can get on, log on, and figure out how to use it at that point.
Yeah, because during that time, the AOB is finishing their military decision-making process.
Mm-hmm.
So PSYOP detachment command or PSYOP leadership is probably integrated on that AOB staff.
Yep. And
plugging away. So how are they immediately providing value, or when do we start to see a team have the ability to provide value to that commander and sergeant major?
I think one thing I always kind of preach to the detachment commander and team sergeant is just keeping that commander aware of what's going on, right? And then the integration piece and the planning, right?
Mm-hmm.
So in previous years, it's information operations, or they called it non-lethal.
Yeah.
Was always kind of like an afterthought.
Yeah.
Right. And you've got to they create this grandiose kinetic plan, and then they're like, all right, let's sprinkle a little IO on it.
Mm-hmm.
Right. But that stuff should be baked in early as possible.
And
right.
Post and during messaging.
All that stuff. Yeah. So I always tell these guys when they come out, to make sure that they're keeping those commanders informed, and then also putting themselves in the planning process so they can show that value. Hey, whatever it may be, this is what PSYOP or information operations can do to make you either more lethal or, create time and space for you to be more successful.
Yeah. Is it effective for one of the PSYOP leaders to get in the target working group?
Absolutely.
And do that non-lethal part of the targeting?
Oh yeah. I mean, you have your pros and cons of being the non-lethal guy, but typically or non-kinetic is the term of the day now. But there's benefit to that, right? And I think a lot of people interchangeably use the word intelligence and information, and
different things.
Different,
sure.
Absolutely, right? So
intel means analysis and stuff happens.
Exactly, right? So as PSYOPers, we deal with information and we don't deal in intelligence, right? But where that kind of line is drawn is, the information that we see in the information environment can be passed to those folks that can then, either corroborate their intelligence that they currently have or use that information, put some analysis behind it, and then create intelligence.
It's more pieces of the puzzle.
Right, exactly. It goes into that cycle, the targeting cycle, as one may call it.
Yes.
So being involved in those working groups, right, and providing that information to the pertinent folks like the intelligence section, the fires guys, whatever, is huge. And it can be like a quick win for PSYOP or for the unit, because throughout the rotations, whatever means of information, they're probably going to see some stuff that's like, oh, this is pretty important and needs to be actioned, and taking that information to those working groups can be beneficial for them.
So nerdy question, what, like, doctrinally, is there anything specific that a PSYOPer is making for that commander, like product wise, like, or are they just putting in key pieces of information like into the target decision board, into other doctrine things that the staff could choose to make or not make? Like, are they making the commander decision matrices and stuff like that? Like, is there anything PSYOP specific, or like,
Yeah, I mean, so our doctrine, we're governed by the CJCSI, and then also like MISO programs for, whatever region that we're in. But the lowest level kind of doctrinal products that we create it's called a PSYOP series, right? So those,
is that something they're making while they're here? Is that like, we're too granular at the company level to like worry about that kind of thing?
Yeah, typically that's more of like staff level thing. I mean, detachments do create it, right? Like anytime you conduct PSYOP, like it has to be under an approved series.
Yeah. So is the Burrow, when we're playing Sagitiv, Siege, are we producing something like that for the detachment to look at?
Yeah. So
and they can tie their actions into?
Yes. So we have some pre-approved series that we give the team but when they come out here so they can immediately start messaging as they will. But how we kind of game that is this. So the scenario is war has just happened, right? So this is like large scale near peer threat, either in EUCOM or the Indo-Pacific. So the war has just begun. So prior to that, you would have had a regional PSYOP team in that area working out of, with the country team, with their approved series, doing whatever they.
But that's competition stuff.
That's competition, right?
So
that's where I'm getting.
So our authorities are going to change, our permissions.
Yes. So once we've gone from competition to conflict, everything changes, right? So at that point, you do have the approved series that are in currently working, but now like it's really on the team to create their own. And it's hard because those things take a lot of time if you properly do the analysis and then do the proper steps of the 7-step PSYOP process. And we have maybe 2+ weeks with the unit to include their prep and exfil. So we try to alleviate that a little bit, because if that were the case, then that's all the team would do when they come out here, is they'd just be writing series, and that's stuff you can do back at home station.
Yeah, we don't want to do that. I don't know, from a maneuver side, since I have an infantry and SF background, it's like, when we're doing our MDMP training, through the Q course and everything, it's always like, all right, do this brief and do this brief, and then like at all these stages you have, hey, fill out this table, make this thing.
Yeah.
And you're like, in the captain's career course, when I was in the 18 Alpha course, wherever, it's kind of just looked at as like, okay, this is something I have to do. And like being here, I realized like, no, these are really valuable tools before and after you go into the area of operations. Like, I have spent my time as an OCT trying to teach, coach, mentor detachments, SF detachments, to continue to use those doctrinal things to help in targeting cycles. Now, if they had a PSYOPer embedded with them, that'd be great, because then that'd be an extra person to help with all that those processes. And I was just curious if there was like an ISR matrix, or a collection matrix rather, equivalent for that staff level, the company battalion staff level.
Yeah.
But
yeah, it's kind of weird, and I agree too. Like, right, like here we play the balance of like, hey, like everything has to be by doctrine.
Yeah.
Like, right, but you know, in my opinion, this is like potentially World War III type scenario, and time is of the essence.
Yes.
So there's the abbreviated MDMP, or the abbreviated troop leading procedures, just so you can get the mission done, is where I kind of like draw the line, right?
Yeah.
So we have to, it's a fine balance of making sure these guys are doing everything doctrinally correct, and then, but also like, hey, look, like the horde has crossed, you know, so like if you want to sit here and spin your wheels and spend a week, you know,
well, I think it's
planning, then
I think it's a difference in like, and we don't have the recent, you know, we haven't been in large scale conflict in decades, fortunately. But like during the global war on terror, it was very held at a very high level for a PSYOPer to get something approved. It'd go through a lot of staff wickets up to some general officer. And I get what you're saying. I think that you're trying to, you know, shorten that kill chain, so to speak, versus like a maneuver element. It's a lot easier to get approved to move from A to B and go do, you know, raid, ambush, whatever.
It's a lot easier
that
to
kind
do
of stuff is a lot quicker to get approved than the, well, we don't really know what the second, third order effects are of this tweet. So so we're going to say no. So I think that's great. Like, you don't have to jump through all the hoops. If you want to, I need to look up what the 7 steps are that you keep mentioning. That seems interesting to me. But like, there's definitely an abbreviated process for a reason. I just, came here, and I'm now really interested. I wish I could have spent some time watching over your shoulder at the AOB while you're, you know, coaching those PSYOP teams. With that, what does, like, here at the National Training Center, does our SOF PSYOPers, do they go integrate at all with the conventional PSYOP? Do they go over and do anything to help the brigade? And I know it's like SOF is over here doing SOF things, and what we're really focused on is things that kind of help the division level and the corps level, and the brigade's like, hey, there's like tanks like destroying us, we need some help. So like they have their own conventional PSYOP probably, but like, is there anything you guys have seen tie in to make the brigade feel like, oh, SOF is providing us extra value?
Yeah, absolutely. So typically, you know, we have our SOF PSYOP guys, you know, embedded with the AOB, and then the conventional brigade that comes out here has a reservist detachment, and sometimes we've seen some active guys over there. But to answer your question, yes, they 100% should absolutely be tied in with those folks, because in the information environment, everybody, if you have all these people inputting information right into this environment, but then you're not coordinating, you could get some deconflicting information, right, causing confusion and chaos for whoever is consuming this information, right, and then you'll start running into some problems. Example, so one easy thing that, or not easy, but one thing that you see a lot of folks do is like they'll establish a tip line, right?
Okay, yeah.
So like, hey,
we forgot.
Call in if you call in if you see, you know, like tanks in these towns or whatever, you know, whatever that may be. So one example of that is, right, we had our SOF guys create a tip line, and then we had our conventional folks create a tip line, right? So we have 2 separate tip lines, right? And then you have folks seeing this in the environment, right? And then it's like, okay, well, we see all these tip lines, right? And then who do we call? Like, but there, and then also there was like no information, like, okay, like, what are we looking for? Like, here's the tip line, call it. Okay, what's next, right?
Like, are they putting that out in social media? Are they putting it out in flyers? Are they telling people like
well, I mean,
in
it's
person?
it's multiple. It's really like, so when I go, we can talk about the 7-step PSYOP process, right? So just thinking about that as like, like doing an op order, right?
Okay.
Or MDMP, right? You have your steps. So part of that is you're doing your analysis, right? Your target audience analysis. So you're looking at who am I trying to get to do a certain thing, right? A behavior change. So then you'll look at, a group of people and say, hey, like, how do I want them to call this tip line, right?
Okay.
So like, how do I get them that information? So that can vary. So throughout your analysis, you can be like, okay, these people look at, social media all the time. So you might do like ion post or the synthetic internet post, or it might just be a face-to-face, like, hey, like going to a town, and talking to them. Yeah. So it's, to answer your question, it really is, it's on the team. How do they get that information out there?
Okay. So what are like good and bad practices, for PSYOPers?
I think, being too reliant on one thing, right? So they, find the easy button of like, hey, I can easily do an ion post, or I can easily send out an SMS message, and then that's all they do. Or just ignoring something, right? So like, I know we've had folks come out and say, hey, like, from my previous experience, social media is not something we do, right? And so we're just gonna not do it, period. And I'm like, okay, well that's cool, and I understand real world versus, a CTC rotation, two different things, right? So up to this point, we haven't, like you said, it's been decades since we've actually had a full like force on force near peer threat, conflict. I would say probably the real last one we had was probably Korea,
Yeah.
Maybe Vietnam. I don't know. That's more, I would akin Vietnam more to like kind of like GWAT, but
yeah, irregular warfare.
Yeah. But yeah, so like back then we didn't have all those things, and like currently and throughout the 20 plus years of GWAT, using the social media or the internet is kind of taboo, right? It's like there's a lot of restrictions on that. It's
somebody
we're not really doing that,
Somebody let a video leak of something bad, and then
because when you lose control of it once it gets on the internet, like
it's
you lose control,
forever.
right? And then
let's go to the Wayback Machine.
Yeah, right. So like we don't really do that. So, but here, I like to think, in my opinion, if World War III happens, there's going to be a lot of doors that open in regards to like information operations, or even, the kinetic fight, right? Like at first it's probably going to be like, okay, we're doing things the same, but we're going to learn throughout this process. And we're like, okay, like in my opinion, there's going to be a lot of abbreviations and what's the word I'm thinking of? Like the abbreviated planning process, MDMP,
like time
right?
sensitive.
Yeah, right. And like also when it comes to like approval, right? Because that stuff, you're not going to be able to wait 6 months to get a series approved.
So yeah, doing time sensitive stuff instead of waiting for a series to be approved. Definitely more realistic, I think, for large scale conflict. So with that, what kind of support, direction, informal or formal comes down from higher for the PSYOP detachment? Like, do they receive specific direction from the SODIF while they're here at NTC? I know there's an annex for them, but like in the scenario as it's going, are they receiving fragos in the same manner that the AOB will receive a frago sometimes, or did they have to get SODIF approval for messaging, or is it vested lower where they can do that messaging faster?
Yeah. So no, first of all, no, they do not, like PSYOP specifically doesn't get like a frago, right? The unit as a whole gets a frago, says, hey, like conduct this, right? This mission. So within that, the AOB starts spinning, everybody's planning, and PSYOP typically falls into that planning process. So as it sits when they first arrive here, right, their approval process is like, up at task force level, whatever, CJSODA for whatever the acronym of the day is for the scenario. So in that process, that should start to like key them in that, hey, like the time that it's going to take me to get something approved to support this mission that's happening in like 2 days, it's not going to happen. Right. So then, and sometimes like, with more experienced teams, like, oh, I need to request that approval is delegated down to a lower echelon commander. And sometimes, with team guys, we have folks that come out that are just fresh out of the schoolhouse, so they don't know those things. So that's when I'll kind of come in and say, hey, like, kind of give them a little hint here and there, like, hey, like, this is going to take some time. Maybe you should think about getting that, like, requesting that approval authority is delegated down. So once they do that, that alleviates a lot of that time that it takes for them to get things approved and start, and it gets them kind of moving. So my primary focus in the initial phases is just like, hey, let's just get something across the board, right? Build that confidence, right? Whether, it works or not, it doesn't matter. But once you get something going, then you can build off of that.
Yeah. So like the AOB, without trying to give anything away, and the civil affairs, the psychological operations, folks that they have on the AOB staff and working with them are doing all sorts of engagements with military, non-military, all these different entities. They're out there looking at social media, listening to the actual, media that we have, whether that's the televised stuff, the radio stuff, the print stuff, and they're gathering all this information and they're synthesizing it. And like through that, on the backside of NTC's exercise, we have people injecting information that is supposed to be collected and then analyzed and then developed into targets. So like in a perfect scenario, they're getting tidbits of information leading up to a potential target that they can do kinetic or non-kinetic or with layered effects, ideally. How hard is it for those PSYOPers to be integrated enough to that staffing process that they're hearing those tidbits of information, or they're the ones presenting that, and they're going, oh, I can do X, I can message X on Pulse, I can message Y on Ion, we can do a leaflet drop or something like, like flash to bang. Are they able to knock that out in 2 or 3 days and actually see effects like pre or during the target? Or are we only really kind of doing post target messaging like successfully here at NTC?
It really depends on the team, right? But yes, I would say initially you'll see teams doing like a lot of post stuff, right? Because of the time constraints that they have, and they're just getting their feet underneath them, right? And also like experience levels, and also how many people do they bring out? So I've seen, rotations where it's just 2 or 3 guys or gals showing up on a team. And then I've seen it where they bring a full detachment plus folks, right? And then regardless of how many people they bring, how are they delegating those tasks? Because you've got to have someone that's like focused on, the higher headquarters, right? Like keeping them informed and doing the planning, larger scale planning. And then you have your doers that are down there, like monitoring the information environment, like you mentioned, finding those tidbits of information that's being provided in the scenario, and then collecting that, doing the analysis while simultaneously trying to plan and execute, PSYOP messaging. So it's challenging. It is, right? Because you're here for a limited amount of time. Right. So you got to find that balance of like, okay, how much time am I going to spend planning? How much time am I going to spend monitoring the information environment and doing that analysis? And then also like observing the information environment once you put something out there. Cause that's one thing I'd like to mention is effectiveness, right? Like that's like a key piece that a lot of people will neglect, because like, okay, we get something out there. Okay. Then we're moving on to the next mission.
Measures of performance, measure of effectiveness.
Exactly. Right. So like a lot of times these teams, we're moving so fast that they don't really like think about, or they neglect the effectiveness piece. Right. And that's super important, because our peers, we see that, or not peers, but our adversaries. Okay. That's a TTP, or tactics, technique, and procedure that they typically use. Is they just throw a bunch of stuff out there. When they throw it on the wall, see what sticks. And we like to be a little more precise. So if it's not working, then you need to adjust it. So you have to monitor those effects, and it's tough because that's a lot on us on the backside of providing the effectiveness in a fictitious or synthetic information environment, you're like, okay, yes, hit the I believe button.
Well,
it worked.
How good is PSYOP doing? Well, they sent 100 tweets and made 50 memes. Okay, that is a sort of measure of performance, but are any of them landing?
Effective? Right?
Yeah. Are they effective?
Where's the like?
Have we moved the
measurable?
Needle,
Yeah, exactly. Where's the measurable behavior change? Right? Because I love it, and I hate it at the same time when teams come up like, I hear them in a brief. They're like, oh, we put out 50 tweets today, and we got like, bunch of responses or whatever it is. I'm like, okay, so what's the so what to that? What did you accomplish?
Yeah.
I'm not saying to ignore it, but it's a mean, right?
Yeah. Is 50 tweets better than one? I don't know. Depends on what the tweet is.
Yeah, right. Or is
or the X,
how
whatever.
How do you measure that, right? In the physical observable world, right? Like you've got people responding to you on the internet. Okay, cool.
Yeah. Well, I think and this was Red PSYOP, if I'm not mistaken. They did a leaflet flyer style messaging campaign, and that actually produced an effect of having a whole horde of people show up asking the SF company for food during a rotation.
Yeah.
So that's kind of more of a tangible hey, my flyer produced this effect.
Exactly. Right.
So that's the kind of thing you're trying to see, and it's not always as easy as I had 25 to 30 people show up and ask for food. IDP, internally displaced people. Your tweet might not bump the needle, in a visible way, but it may have an effect.
Yeah, but you may not know, right? Yeah. And that's a good example too, right? Like that was something very simple that Red PSYOP team did. They printed out a bunch of like leaflets basically that said, hey, it had an American flag on it, said, hey, go to U.S. forces and they'll give you free food and water and shelter, right? And that is a tactic the Russians use. They create these dilemmas for a populace and they try to direct these people towards their enemy, right, to create that dilemma, right? Because if us as the U.S., right, we're not going to just sit there and ignore a local population, they're going to show up, but regardless if you try to ignore them or not, and you have this mass amount of civilians just walking up to you, and especially special operations, what do you do at that point, right? That creates this dilemma for you where you're going to be distracted from what you're trying to do.
Well, your messaging is not always focused on, I want a group of people to move from A to B. There's a whole gamut of different things you could be trying to message. Hey, if we're doing something kinetic, maybe we do want to try and get people out of that area, so it's easier to do that kinetic action. Or maybe
divert the enemy's attention in a different direction, whatever.
Or do some kind of deception where the enemy thinks we're in a place that we're not. Or you just are trying to create a feeling within a certain group of people, internal conflict or support, which I think another Red TPT example, Red PSYOP example, is they actually had a messaging campaign, I think through mostly printed material via printed out memes and stuff, that made a unit going through a rotation here prior to they actually getting into the box. So they were doing their planning cycle before they actually entered the box. They garnered a animosity between the lower enlisted and the officer corps of that particular unit through a series of memes that made the enlisted feel that the officers were disingenuous in some of the rules that they were putting out.
Didn't apply.
Yeah, they didn't.
The higher ranks.
Certain people didn't have to follow. Don't drink, or I can use this latrine, but you can't use this latrine. And that's great, but the only reason we heard that is through back channels. I think we heard grumblings in that particular unit. So really hard to measure the effectiveness of something like that in the real world, unless you actually have somebody that's tied into that group of people to then back channel feed you that information.
Yep. Yeah. And that goes back into the planning process, right? Thinking about that stuff before you execute, whatever it is, putting those things in place to be able to, actually observe those things.
What do you think PSYOP's role in large-scale conflict is? You don't have to do a dissertation.
Yeah, no, yeah. I honestly, I don't think a lot is different, like doctrinally, from what we did in GWAT or whatever the case may be, compared to like large-scale combat. I think it's primarily using the information environment to create dilemmas for our adversaries, right? Or control the information environment to our benefit. And I think a major difference between what we see now or in GWAT compared to like large-scale conflict is going to be like the amount that we see, right?
Yeah.
Because one of the constraining factors that we have in place on ourselves is that approval process, right?
Mm-hmm.
Which it needs to be there, right?
Yeah.
There has to be checks and balances. But when we look at our adversaries, right, they don't do things the same as we do, right?
Yeah.
So they don't have they have limited or none at all approval process to do these things. So we're playing catch up the whole time, right? And typically in the information environment, it's whatever is seen first or heard first is what's believed, whether that's true or not, right? You look at the headline and read the headline or the first sentence of the article, and they're like, oh yeah, well that's my truth now.
Who needs to read more than that,
Right.
That's too many words.
Yeah, but I think that's going to be
headline does it.
Yeah. I mean, that's going to be the major difference, right? Is just the speed that our adversaries can operate in compared to like how long it takes us to approve something. I think, and I hope, and in my opinion, that would be abbreviated and shortened, so we can keep up or be better than our adversaries.
No, that's a good point, and kind of reminded me earlier in our conversation between conventional and SOF.
Mm-hmm.
I think the approval authority for a lot of things, in large scale conflict will go down because you need that speed. But how do you make sure that messaging is uniform or at least not conflicting with each other? If you have conventional forces out here doing messaging, SOF, special operations forces out here doing messaging.
Mm-hmm. And not even that. It's like within SOF and conventional, right? Like you think large scale conflict, it's not going to be like a brigade or an AOB or a PSYOP detachment. It's going to be like a PSYOP battalion spread across the country, right? And then like divisions and corps and armies, right?
Yeah, it's going to be however many units it needs to be.
Yeah, exactly,
or
right?
more.
So like not only are you like needing to talk to your left and right units, like right, you're going to have folks all over the place doing messaging. So like or working in the information environment. So it's really going to be on those like higher level like staff 3-9 sections, the information operations folks, at the staff level and above to like make sure that we're not putting out conflicting information. And that's going to be hard, right? Because, what's the first thing that breaks down? Always.
Communication,
right? So like,
that important thing.
Yeah. So like communication between, your lower echelon units up to higher, and then also like side to side, like all that stuff's going to break down. Right.
Yeah.
So we don't know. We're not going to know until we get there. So,
And then just to wrap this up, what's the biggest thing you've learned while here?
I think the biggest thing is just understanding, right, where we fit into the bigger picture, and then understanding like SOF in general, right? Like I think all of us could probably say that we probably had a little lack of understanding of what the other tribes do, what civil affairs does. I don't even know if I still know what civil affairs does, but just kidding.
We're kidding, Grant.
Yeah, we love you guys. But but understanding, right? Like what our jobs entail, and then like how do we all kind of fit together? And I think that's like, I know our leadership here really preaches like we are an RSOF unit, like true RSOF unit.
We are.
We share a team room,
cross-functional team.
Yeah, right. Like we share a team room, so that with that, it's inherent that we learn more about each other's jobs, and then also like how we come together and then fit into that larger fight.
Yeah, absolutely. So thank you for your time, Eric. Really appreciate you coming out and talking about psychological operations at the National Training Center. It's a unique and really valuable experience, I think, for any Army Special Operations soldier to come out to. So I would encourage all psychological operations, hey, if you have the chance, come out to the National Training Center. It's better than JRTC. Or go to the Joint Readiness Training Center. I just kid because obviously we're a little biased. This is where the Army has put us for now as soldiers. So grow where you are planted, and we all have come to love the Borough Special Operations team here. It's a great place to work. So consider that for a broadening opportunity after you're done with your team time.
Shameless plug.
Yep, for sure. But hey, we do large-scale conflict operations in support of conventional forces across multidimensional operations. It's a lot to talk about inside of this little window of time that we've sliced off today. But hopefully you've enjoyed focusing in on some stuff about psychological operations. We'll be continuing this podcast and touching all of the RSOF tribes and hopefully our enablers that make special operations happen, because we cannot do what we do without those conventional enablers across signalers, intelligence, and there's definitely more out there that I'm forgetting, but logistics, etc. You guys definitely make what we do happen. So thank you, and girls, obviously, men and women out there. With that, I will let Eric give his final thoughts, and we'll close it out.
Yeah. Well, first of all, Wes, thanks for having me on here. I really appreciate it. And then hopefully this helps, some folks coming out eventually, to the CTCs, have a little be a little better prepared. But yeah, thanks for having me, and hopefully this is helpful for the listeners out there to, one, have a better understanding of what PSYOP does and contributes to the fight, and then two, what the CTCs can provide for units coming out here. But thanks.
Yeah, appreciate it. Thank you.
Thank you for listening to Off the Radar, where RSOF prepares for conflict.
You have been Off the Radar with Sandy West.